Assalamu alaikum everyone, thank you for joining me today. I want to talk about some reoccurrences that I'm finding in counselling, and one of the things is trying to recognise if somebody is abusive. I want to talk about a specific part of that where it can lead to control. And so how do we recognise if a personality is going to be controlling, especially before marriage? And specifically, I want to talk about what we can recognise in ourselves that will change then in us determine whether we would find find ourselves with an abusive person. And that's about looking at, what we lack within ourselves. So I've had lots of cases where men and women have ended up with personalities that are quite controlling, that can be quite mean, quite abusive even. So they'll gaslight them and they'll try to control them, and they'll maybe be derogatory towards them. They might make inappropriate jokes, um, things that aren't easy to kind of outwardly just say, oh, well, you've hit me, but it's still abusive, and the person in the relationship feels that. When you're about to get married, one of the things that you want to look at is whether or not you yourself have any insecurities. And this can be about looks, it can be about your figure, it can be about your family. And I'll tell you this, the spectrum is unlimited. When you have something within, and that doesn't mean to say that you're not allowed to have vulnerabilities. Okay? We're not talking about not having vulnerabilities. It's about if you have those vulnerabilities and then you're looking for something outside of yourself to fill that. I'm going to give the example of beauty. So I might believe that I'm not very pretty. I might grow up with issues of inadequacies around my weight, or it could be around my looks, could be around my skin color, anything to do with the form, anything to do with, my lack of self-worth around my beauty. So what might happen is then I meet somebody who focuses a lot on beauty. Okay, so they deem themselves as handsome or beautiful. They have spent a lot of attention on their looks, and when you meet them, you can tell that this person, values these things that you feel you lack. And so if they choose you, somewhere in your mind, your status or your self-worth is raised because of the level of self-worth that they have. So what we do is we choose somebody who in their mind thinks they're really high up there in looks and in their figure. They might be somebody who goes to the gym regularly, somebody who might deem that their skin color is far superior if it's pale. It could be somebody who's health conscious, whatever that might be. And what you might find is that during those conversations, they'll say things like that to you. They'll say, oh, how much people admire them, or they might, if it's somebody that's been divorced before or separated, they might even say, oh, my previous husband or my previous wife, I wasn't attracted to them, they didn't look after themselves, etc., etc. And what starts to happen is that then you position yourself to say, oh, well, if that person wasn't good enough, if this person then chooses me, then I must be, in their eyes, a certain standard. Does that make sense? So they raise your status. They make you feel like because they have this high standard in beauty and in esteem, that they're going to think the same of you. And usually we think that might be a good thing. Like if somebody's saying that they're good looking and they're saying that they have a certain physique or a certain skin color, that they're self-confident. But I want you to really think about this. Is it self-confidence or is it arrogance? Is it self-confidence or is it that they think they're better than others? And that when they see you and they say, oh, I like you, have they raised your status, or was it your lack of knowing that about yourself, that makes you think that somehow now this person's going to accept me? So it's not really that you didn't have the looks, or your skin wasn't good, or your body. It wasn't any of that. It's that actually it was all okay, and then they saw you because they already had that standard, and then they liked you, rather than it meaning that somehow you've gone up in the world because of them, like a social status, because you're married to somebody who values these things. And don't forget, this is not always conscious. The thing that I want to draw you to is this, that if you end up with someone like that, one of the things that can happen as a side effect of this is that that person who values those things can easily devalue you, because you didn't have that in the first place. So you marry them and everything's okay for a little while, and the story about their ex, whether that's somebody they were married to, sometimes it's people who have dated, and I'm sorry to say that, but it happens in this day and age. We want to live in an idyllic world, but Islam is perfect, but Muslims are not. And so they might have told you this story, but then you think, oh well, I've done all my due diligence. If they've already been with somebody they didn't like when they're marrying me, then surely I must be okay. And you have to slow down at that point and think, the fact that this person saw somebody previously, because people don't get married without seeing anybody, no matter what story they give you. So the fact that they married somebody, they saw this person before they married them, and now they tell you they were either forced, or they lost attraction, or they didn't have a choice. Sometimes it's arranged marriages or whatnot. The point being is that they did see the person and they did make a choice. And essentially what they're saying to you is that they don't take responsibility. Okay, that's number one. They blame the other person, even though they're saying, well, I wasn't attracted, as if to say, at that point, me not being attracted to my wife or my husband was legitimate. Because then when you get married to them, and a few steps down the line they say that to you, they're also going to feel that that's legitimate. So what that's going to mean is that your reality is going to be skewed, because your standard of the beauty that you have can go up and down depending on their opinion of you at that time. So that's really important to remember, that when you're marrying somebody who tells you about looks and these things, and that it fluctuates, because they're not certain, it will cause uncertainty in your marriage, and you will feel lost once you're married to that person and they follow the same trends and the same patterns. And this isn't only in looks. This can be to do with wealth, or it can be to do with education. It can really be anything where there's a discrepancy, like a difference between your status and theirs, and if they feel like there's something that they've got above. And I can give you examples of people who, even if, say, you lost a parent when you were younger, and you pick up some hint of them feeling like, oh, I'm such a good person for marrying somebody who didn't have parents, as an example. Sooner or later, if things don't go right, they might turn around and say, well, they did you a favour. But if you in yourself don't see that as a weakness, or you don't go seeking out somebody who has the perfect family, which is where the discrepancy is going to come. So you feel like, I didn't have this family, or maybe you did have mum and a dad, but your family was dysfunctional in whatever way, or there were certain things missing. So you meet somebody who tells you, I've got this great family and they're so wonderful and and you think, yes, that's the family I'm going to go into because they're so wonderful. And when you get there, you realize that actually they are not so wonderful, partly because there was something missing in you and they couldn't fulfill that. Okay, so you want to go back. So who should you be choosing in those examples? Who should you be choosing? well, actually, you should be choosing more people similar to you. And I don't mean that in terms of like, well, if I have worries about my looks, then I marry somebody else who has worries about their looks. Usually that's not how it works. What we're saying is that if you do recognize something that you in your mind think is less in you, whether that's looks or status or money or wealth or education or your height or the way you talk or the region you come from, it doesn't really matter what it is. In your mind, you have to say that whoever I am, whatever these things are, this is me as a human being. I accept that, I had parents who were like this. I accept that this is the body that Allah gave me, or the skin color that Allah gave me, or I recognize that I had very abusive parents. I really don't want to go into a situation where I have an abusive husband or an abusive wife, and therefore I'm going to do the work where I say, no, I'm going to accept that. I'm not going to accept that and you start to change yourself. So where you might think, your looks are not so great, you're honest with that. You say, you know what, I recognize that my looks aren't great. And, it's important to like have that balance. So it's not like, none of us are really all supermodels and nobody's really ugly. It's just perception. So you've got to be okay in yourself to say, you know what, the height that I am, the body that I have, the family that I come from, all of those things, I'm going to accept. And when you are not afraid of those things, when you don't feel defensive towards those things, when you don't feel offended about those things, what starts to happen, you start to attract people who are also comfortable with things not being perfect. And that's who you want to choose. You don't want to choose somebody who is going to feel like they're better than you and then use that against you. That's the last thing you want. This is just one of the parts, one of the things that you can look for. I will be uploading lots of new videos, so if you'd like to access those or get notification when they come out, please subscribe. Share the videos with anyone that you feel, and you'd be surprised how many people are out there suffering in silence, and that video share might actually help them. And please like the video so I know that it's working, if the content is good. And inshallah I will see you next time. Assalamu alaikum.